My name is Debbie Pearmain, and I'm a human resources consultant. I've been working in HR for 25 years, and I've worked with a lot of large leadership development companies and organizations. I'm certified as an ICF coach. I do flourishing workplace coaching, flourishing life coaching. I used to work in career services, leadership development, people and culture, all that good stuff. So that's a little bit about me and my background. I want to thank the CME for sponsoring this session today for you on career management strategies, career success strategies. And also, just as I said, give you the opportunity to ask me whatever questions you have. I'll do my best to answer them. And feel free as well, like we said, just to take notes as we go through. We are recording this session for those of you who just joined us, and so it will be available afterwards as well for you to refer back to. And I just want to take a moment to do a land acknowledgement and just say that I am very grateful to be working and living on the unceded and traditional territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. So grateful to be here in beautiful BC. I live in North Vancouver. So just take a moment to acknowledge the land that you are living on and working on. And before we get started, I just wanted to pause to ask if anyone had any questions. So are there any questions before we get going? We will be doing some breakout sessions. So I'm going to be encouraging you to make sure your videos are on, so you're participating and present, that you can unmute yourself. And as I said, feel free to raise your hand, put questions, comments in the chat, participate however you feel comfortable. So we do have a lot that we are covering in our 2 hours together today. We're going to be talking about you and your performance management. We're going to be talking about different expectations and roles and responsibilities between you and your manager. We'll be talking about your career goals and desires, and we'll be talking about emotional intelligence and helping you understand your strengths and areas for improvement. We'll also be today talking about some really important topics like how to be coachable and manage upwards and provide feedback if you have feedback for others. And then lastly, we'll be ending up with some just overall career management strategies and lots of just tips and tools that I've picked up along the way myself in managing my own career, but also in supporting hundreds of people in their career journey, in their leadership journey. So no question is off limits. And I hope you've come today with some good questions. There's, of course, always objectives. And so in the 2 hours, we're really going to be covering how performance management can work for you. So what are the positive benefits for you? And how can you engage in the process in ways that will help you be successful? Obviously, talking about really clearly understanding expectations between you and your supervisor or manager or director. It is a partnership, and you're going to hear me talk a lot about that today. And then hopefully at the end of the day, you're going to leave with some good strategies for not just managing your career, but also your manager. And at the end of our time together, I am going to give you about 5 minutes at the end to take everything we've discussed today and create an action plan for yourself and create some SMART goals for yourself. So that's the goal and the hope, and that will be the outcome of our time together. So again, just wanting to pause and ask if there's any questions. It's always faster to just raise your hand or unmute yourself than it is to type questions, but sometimes it's easy to type questions while I'm speaking so you don't interrupt me. So feel free to do either. So the very first thing we're going to talk about today is performance management. And this is a really important partnership between you and your manager. So most organizations have some degree of performance management in place. Performance management is one of the key HR processes that helps managers and employees work together to achieve goals and be successful. And performance management is kind of an umbrella term that is made up of a whole bunch of things. And so I'm just curious from all of you, what is your understanding of what performance management is? So if you're just thinking of the word performance management, and I'm saying to you, it's an umbrella term that has a whole bunch of different pieces to it, can you even just think of one piece of that performance management process and even just type one thing into the chat? So when you're thinking of what is performance management made up of? What are the pieces of the performance management puzzle? So thank you. Right away, it's how will my performance be measured? This is really critical. So my hope is all of you on here, sitting on here today with me, are very clear on things like your job description and the goals and the expectations that your manager has of you. And if you're not, that's already one of your first takeaways, is to get clarity. There are lots of people working in all kinds of jobs today whose job descriptions are not accurate, are not up to date. I mean, some people don't even have job descriptions, right? So how can you then be reviewed when the expectations on you are not clear? And job descriptions is only one piece of clear expectations. There are other things. And so I'm seeing here some other thoughts. Yep, another really important piece of the puzzle is for you to get feedback. So again, I want you, as you're sitting here today, to ask yourself, are you getting feedback regularly? Are you getting feedback that's helpful for you to be successful? What kind of feedback are you getting? Are you getting only constructive feedback? You need to be getting balanced feedback, right? So you want to be getting feedback that's positive so you can keep doing the things you're doing well, and also receiving feedback that's constructive, right? We can't fix or manage or improve if we don't know. So it's really important for you to have some kind of process in place between you and your supervisor or manager where you are receiving feedback regularly. Now, does that have to be every week? No. And in some workplaces, that cadence is possible. And in other workplaces, it's not. I'm going to suggest at a bare minimum that you are getting feedback monthly. Bi-weekly, even better. But some kind of touch point between you and your supervisor or manager where you are hearing what you're doing well and what you need to improve. So again, if that's not happening for you, that's mission critical. So that's an action for you to take away from today. Another part of performance management is you giving feedback. So are there opportunities for you to actually provide feedback to your supervisor or manager, right? What is going well for you from your perspective? And what is not going well? What are the barriers that are getting in the way of your success? Because their job is to help remove those barriers, right? Their job is to help you problem solve those barriers and come up with solutions. So again, is there that process? And again, is it weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, where you and the person you are working for, because it's a partnership and it's a collaboration, are regularly giving feedback in both directions? And if that's not happening, that's another really important takeaway. Thank you. Jackie said here, reviews, of course, right? So let's start at the beginning. You have clear expectations. Then you go and do your job. You've got some goals. You've got a job description. You've got workplace policies and procedures, so you know what to follow. And then you go do your work. Someone at some point is monitoring it, and they're giving you feedback. And this is ongoing through the year. And all of it then accumulates at the end of the year where you're having a performance review. Now, that's a whole topic unto itself, but that performance review needs to be effective for you. A lot of people say, I have these performance reviews, it's a waste of time, I just review myself. Right? Or I have performance reviews, it's a waste of time, it's all just negative. Or I have performance reviews, my manager doesn't really know what I do. So here's the thing, your performance reviews should be a summary of some of the good things you've done throughout the entire year. It should also be a summary, perhaps, of the things that you were challenged by. And it also should include things like future training that would help you be more successful. And if you have certain career interests, there should be something on the performance review about that. So what do your performance reviews look like? Are they effective? Right? And I hope what you're hearing as we even start talking about performance management is that you're in the driver's seat. So you are in the driver's seat of your career. You are in the driver's seat of your success. It is not your manager's job to manage your performance. Like, this is a partnership and a collaboration. I mean, it is their job to manage it to a degree, but what I'm trying to say is it's shared ownership. There's shared accountability. Now, this might be different, right, than what's currently going on for you. And it might be different from things that happened in the past. And this is because these best practices have evolved over time. Some companies are kind of still stuck in the old way. I'm just going to be honest, right? Performance management used to be much more authoritative and much more top-down. Also, there's differences and limitations if you're in a unionized environment, right? So, but if you really are wanting to understand best practices for how performance should be managed today in 2024, all the teaching, all the training is that this is meant to be a partnership between managers and employees. It's a collaboration. There's shared accountability and responsibility. Everyone should be doing their part to help it be successful, right? And it should be a positive experience. And it also should be focused on learning and development. So as you've heard all the things that I've just said, I'm curious what questions you have for me or what takeaways, right, you have just from this first part of our conversation today. So what questions do you have or what takeaways do you have? Now, when you're new to a position or job, the reality is you should be receiving feedback more often, right? So that might be daily, weekly. That would be dangerous if you didn't get any feedback for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks. So the lower your performance is, and new performers are low performers because they're learning, there's lots to absorb, there's lots to learn. That should indicate to you how often you should be checking in and getting feedback. And as your performance improves and grows and increases over time, right, the need for that kind of checking in, monitoring, and feedback should decrease a little bit. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And this is why when I teach performance management to managers, right, I say to them, not everyone needs a weekly one-on-one. Some people need daily check-ins. Some people need check-ins every few days. Some people need check-ins every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks. So I want you to think about what you need to be successful. Are you getting the feedback you need? Is it often enough? And are you receiving balanced feedback? Like, these are really important things for you to consider. And then what I'm hoping you're hearing me say today is that you have 50% responsibility in this. And so if it's not happening for you, if any of the things we're talking about on this slide are not happening for you, then what I want to encourage you to do after today is to set up a time and have a meeting with your supervisor or manager to discuss this, because these things are critical for your career success. So again, I'm going to pause. Are there any questions? Now, we've said a lot about performance management. So I'm curious if this is going well and all these things are happening for you, what kind of benefits should you be experiencing? So what do you think the benefits are to you? And how should this process benefit you in your career? Yeah, Allie?
Improved motivation.
Yeah, awesome. What else? Does anyone else have any ideas? What should be going on for you if these things are happening? Increased productivity, great. Yep. Increased skill development, increased job satisfaction. Yeah, better team cohesion. How about even just things like internal promotions? Right? So people's careers over time should be growing, evolving, and advancing. So lots of good positive benefits. And I think it's important, in order for you to buy into this whole notion of, in order for you to have career success, you need to jump on the 50% that you are accountable for when it comes to this idea of performance management. And I'll just be honest, in my 25 years in HR, too many employees are way too passive in this entire process. And their mindset or their belief is kind of wait and see, or it's my manager's job. And so if these things aren't happening for me, right, it's kind of easy to blame and point the finger. And so really a big part of your career success is recognizing you're in the driver's seat. You can take ownership and be accountable for your 50%. So in order for you to do that, right, it is very important that you leave here today being clear on what your manager or supervisor is responsible for when it comes to performance management, right? What's their 50% of this pie? And what's your 50% of the performance pie? So this is where we're going to do our first breakout session. And I'm going to give you 7 minutes. I will set a timer. And I'm putting you into breakout rooms. And here's the question I want you to answer in the breakout rooms. So very simply, on a piece of paper, draw a line down the middle. At the top, write manager responsibility. And in the other column, my responsibility. All right, is everybody clear? And I want you in the breakout rooms to be discussing what is your 50% and what is their 50%. So does anyone have any questions? I'm going to open the breakout rooms and I'll see you back here in 7 minutes. Okay, thank you so much. So just pretending we're all a fly on the wall, let's do a quick debrief here. So let's go with room 1, Brian, Jackie, Mancy, Robin. Hopefully you have one person who took some notes. Can you give us a quick 2 or 3 things? Managers' responsibilities, employees' responsibilities. So who
I can
would
do
like?
that.
Thank you.
So we said it was the manager's responsibilities to like give feedback, review performance, but also to like facilitate training to reach goals like as they've been communicated. Um,
Yeah,
but we said it was like kind of it could be a shared responsibility for the managers and the employee to set goals. So depending on where you are in your performance, like your manager might set goals for you, or you could also choose to set goals for yourself.
great.
And then obviously communicating that to your manager is the employee's responsibility. And then also we said it's the employee's responsibility to sort of like make opportunities for themselves to grow or to like um, vouch for themselves or to like ask for those opportunities.
Okay, I love that. And you know what? I'm going to say to you, this is a big thing. I do a lot of leadership development and I work specifically with people who are like emerging leaders, right? So maybe you're a high performer and you desire, I want to be promoted. Here's the thing. And too many people are way too shy. You need to speak up. You need to let your manager or supervisor know, like, if anything comes available, I'm interested, right? So that's called self-advocacy. And I have to be honest, not enough people learn that skill. I think at times people are a bit too shy and too humble. And this is that part of you managing your career. It's ask, let people know your interests, ask to take on something new or different or challenging. Don't sit back and be shy. That's not going to be to your benefit. So I love that you said that. Ask for opportunities. Great, great input. Thank you. What about room two? Amy, Brian, Carly, is it you, Tong? Please, someone just jump in and volunteer. Give us a few nuggets.
Yeah, I got so for management, it's important to define the job roles, but also to drive the goals and define the goals.
Yeah.
And so, you think of like maybe a captain on the boat and they say, hey, we are going this direction. Everybody needs to work in that direction. You don't micromanage the guy who's like in the engine room. You just let him do his job.
Love it.
And so that's kind of, once a goal is defined for the non-management, once a goal is defined, the worker really provides the drive to achieve the goal.
Mm.
And, at that point, it's up to them to do the job the best they can.
Mhm.
Um, and then another good one that we got was about asking or being open to feedback, and being open to feedback, and then realizing that maybe what you needed to do to achieve the job last time is maybe not what you need to do to achieve the job this time, and know that like your role will change, and like the way that we problem solve changes, the the way that you're going to approach that is also going to change.
Yeah, I love it. Love it. And we are going to talk today about this thing called being coachable. It's like, hey, I don't know everything. I need input. I need feedback. And that is my friend because it's going to help me be successful and not get defensive and not let the ego get in the way, right, Brian? I'm always like, your ego is not your friend. You got to put it in the back seat. So thank you. That was a great takeaway. Let's carry on. Ali, Cyrus, we're getting to the end here. Do we have any other nuggets?
Yes, I can jump in.
Thank
Um, so I'll try and mention stuff that weren't mentioned in breakout room
That's
one and
great.
two.
Yeah.
So we mentioned KPIs, so like key performance indicators of what are the indicators that will basically weigh the performance of the employee. So that's one of the manager's responsibility to set that expectation to the employee. One other thing we mentioned is the manager's responsibility is to break that emotional fear of transparency between them and the employee. So just show them that it's okay to be vulnerable, and it's okay that if things go south, you can still talk to me and tell me that, oh, this and this happened. Um, we also mentioned so going to the employee's responsibility. Um, we mainly mentioned. Having the employees set future goals, like where do they want to head, where do they want to be in a couple of years from now, and
Mhm.
also mainly what was mentioned before is seeking or getting feedback from the employee,
Yeah. Yeah.
from
Awesome.
the manager, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And so I'm going to say my little nugget that I heard you say, not that everything you said was great, but the nugget that we want to really land on here, you need to build the trust, right? So a lot of that is in how your manager is approaching this. And this is why I do training in companies for managers on this exact same topic. They need to create the relationship so that you feel safe and comfortable to be open and honest and to also give feedback. Like if there's things getting in the way of your success, how many of you can think even right now today, and you don't need to out yourself here, but just think about barriers that might be affecting you being successful, right? Can everyone even just think of one thing or even a person, right? And then it's, does your manager know this? That's a whole different thing, isn't it? For you to feel comfortable and safe to be able to like go to your manager and say, hey, this is getting in the way of me being able to do my job well. Like their job is to help clear the path for you. But that can't happen if you don't feel safe and comfortable to speak up and say something. So when I teach managers performance management, it's build a relationship that's trustworthy, keep confidences. And the whole way we should be approaching performance management is it's all about learning. It's not punitive, right? Discipline is something completely separate. That's punitive. Discipline happens when you break a policy or you violate some kind of safety thing or you, right, do something that's disrespectful. You break a company value. But when it comes to performance management, the whole focus is to help you learn and grow and develop. And that doesn't happen if there's this vacuum where you can't have these open, honest conversations with each other. So loved that. And so now I'm just going to simply ask the last two groups so that we can move forward because we have a lot to cover today. Last two groups, Cameron, Francisco, Paul, Suk, anything, Karen Preet, Kamal, Maya, anything to add that we haven't heard, right? Anything to add?
I believe most of it was covered, and it's just based on a relationship between leadership and person and the person who is setting the career paths for themselves to like regularly either check up by themselves, like, or am I doing a job to get to the goal that I need to, and also being reassessed by their own leadership as a set point goals. So that's more than enough. Then I feel like that a lot of us have covered in this like past two groups. So I feel like it's all good.
Okay, okay, awesome. And so, I just have my own little summary slide here, but there's been a lot of great takeaways in your conversations. And part of coming to training is to just learn this stuff, but I also want you to take action and apply it after today. So I do want you to just pause. I'm going to be quiet for a minute. And I want you to think of everything you just heard and your conversations in the breakout rooms and this slide and just jot down some action steps that you could take after this training that would help you be more successful. So the question I want you to answer is, what is not happening for you? So are there things you've heard that aren't happening for you? Are there things you've heard that you're not doing, right? So there's two parts to the puzzle, 50% responsibility for managers, 50% on you. What actions do you need to talk to your manager about that will help you be more successful? I'm going to give you some tools today to help you with that conversation, but also what actions are you responsible for taking for yourself that you haven't been taking? Okay, so now is this chance, I want you to digest this, right? Like sometimes when we come to training, we have so much information just coming at us. It's like going to an all-inclusive buffet and like you're not digesting half of it, right? Then you leave with a stomach ache and nothing happens at the end of the night. So here's what I'm going to ask you. What questions do you have about what you've just heard so far this morning? Because we're going to pivot and go into another topic. So when you think of performance management, I want this to be positive. It's about learning, growing, developing. You take on your 50%. Start self-advocating. If, things aren't clear for you, ask for clarity. If you're not getting enough feedback, ask for it. If you're not getting training, ask for it. If you're not advancing in your career, ask. Do you hear that, right? It's self-advocacy. Other people aren't mind readers. They're not just going to be like, oh, Carly, she's so smart. She's so great. She's a star performer. I'm going to tap her on the shoulder and really make sure that she's getting what she needs. Like, that would be great if all of that was happening. And sometimes it is. Maybe some of you are sitting here today and you're like, yeah, all of that's happening for me. But if it isn't, I want you to start advocating for your needs. It's critical for your own growth and development. What questions do you have for me? If you're more comfortable typing a question privately to me in the chat, feel free to do that, okay? Because, I'll be honest, I'm surprised no one's asking the question like, well, what do you do if their manager isn't doing their 50%? I'm getting some head nod smiles from people.
More than a question, I have something to, well, I guess it's a question. Job description. I can see that for a new hire being very descriptive and important. Company size and how they operate. Job description may not be the number. When put it up there, I just want, looks like mostly green lights that are just training. Is that the main driver, or is it like a goal setting on an annual base that's in line with the company goals? That I can't say that happens in every workplace. Every workplace has different ways of doing business. So just maybe, can you elaborate on that, what you mean by job description there, for clarity? I think I understand, but yeah. And depending on the level of the position, that may be critical, or you have to be a little flexible than what a job description is, depending on your role.
Yeah. Okay. So I will just let you know your audio is really shaky in and out. Did anyone else hear it like that?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. But I think I got the main points of your question. So here's what I'm going to say. I'm really being like upfront HR. Every person needs a job description, full stop. It doesn't have to be fancy and detailed. But there needs to be something clearly communicated to you, not just when you start a job. This should be updated every year. And I'm going to tell you a best practice is to make sure your job description is updated every year. And I tell employees, do it before your performance review. So print out your job description 2 weeks before your performance review, read it, cross off the stuff that's no longer relevant, add in the stuff that is relevant. And as part of your performance review, I want you to sit down with your supervisor and level set, because things change and evolve over time, right? And it doesn't make any sense for you to have a review if you're being reviewed on something that's outdated and no longer relevant. Don't wait for your manager to update your job description. You know your job best. So that's absolutely critical. And it doesn't matter what level you are in the hierarchy of positions. Like, I personally would never agree to be doing a job if I didn't have some set of clear guidelines and expectations. And I'll go back to, obviously, every person, every company, you know, lots of companies don't have HR. So maybe they don't have job descriptions at the beginning. But that doesn't mean as an employee that you can't even create your own job description. Like there are free job description templates. Google it, right? And it doesn't have to be super detailed and fancy, but it should at least clearly outline for you your responsibilities, right? Your day-to-day, what it should look like, right? And it also on there should help you as part of your goal setting conversations. So I hope that answered your question. It's really important because how can you monitor and then measure if the expectations aren't clear in the first place? It's very discouraging and frustrating. Are there any other questions before we move on?
Thank you. In a lot of places, that's managed by goal settings rather than job description. Just my 2 cents. What I've seen in many companies.
Yeah, and I'm agreeing with you. And so what I would be encouraging though is beyond just the goal setting, having a conversation where it's very clear what your responsibilities are and what the expectations are goals, right? Responsibilities are not the same as expectations. And that's the piece, right? That might just be missing.
And
because
a
sorry.
a lot of companies don't even have goal settings either. So I understand from HR perspective how you explain it. Just a small feedback.
No, and I absolutely know that, right? I work with all sizes of companies, small, medium, large. And so I totally understand. And I'm just letting you know as a best practice in any kind of work relationship, there needs to be some clear conversations around expectations and goals if you want to succeed, right? Just because I'm saying that doesn't mean that's what's happening in reality. So I'm encouraging you, right, to advocate for what's going to help you be successful. That's what we're talking about today. So let's start first. Now that you're clear, is everyone clear here on your responsibilities when it comes to managing your career? Here's the list. What are you doing? What are you not doing? Are you clear on your manager's responsibilities? Hoping that you'll have a conversation with them, right, to advocate for what you need after today. And I apologize, this slide looks a little bit funny in terms of the lineup. I'm not sure what happened, but that's okay. So let's get started then with you clearly setting some career goals for yourself. Now, here's the thing. It is really hard to even think about where do I want to be in 5 years or 10 years. But I always say to folks, it's like start with the end in mind, right? All of you are somewhere today. And the question you want to ask yourself is, are you happy and satisfied where you are now? And if the answer is no, then the question is, what would you like to be doing more of? What would you like to be doing less of? And start to get some clarity between where you are now and what you want to be doing more of or less of. And how you get clarity is by, right, just even thinking about what the gap is between where you are now and what you're doing and where you want to be. So what is that gap? Can you clearly identify that gap? What's missing for you? It's very hard for you to be able to self-advocate or self-manage if you don't first understand the gap that's there. If it's too hard for you to think 10 years out, 5 years out, I just say to people, where do you want to be this time next year? Where do you want to be in 2 years? Like shorten your time frame down, right? Because it can feel overwhelming to go out too far. So that's really the first step. Where do you want to be a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years, 10 years? Do you have a clear vision or picture? Once you have that idea, right, in mind, so if you do even right now, write it down on paper, then you need to understand the gap between there and here. So the question is, what skills will you need to be there a year from now? What skills will you need to be there 2 years from now? What experience will you need? What kind of training will help you get there? Right? Where will you get this training? A lot of people who come to me, I coach people in career management and career success. And a lot of people who come to me don't know how to answer those questions. And so then what I say to them is, who do you know? Who's in your network? Who do you know that's doing what you want to be doing a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Can you set up a time, right? So what's an action step? Can you set up a time to meet with that person and ask their advice? Right? So Jackie, if you are where I want to be a year from now, and I know you, and I know you're doing that job. So think of someone in your business now, or someone in your network now, like LinkedIn, right? Or someone that you know from school, or a friend, or, friend of a friend. Like, this is where network is so important. And we're going to talk about that. But I would then say, well, because I can't answer those questions, what skills do I need? What training do I need? What experience do I need? I just know I want to be where you are, right? Then what I would do is I would say, hey, Jackie, can I take you for a coffee? Can I take you for lunch? Can I take you for a beer? I don't know, find a way and connect with Jackie. Do you have like 15 minutes of time, half an hour of time you could spare? I'd really like to get your advice. So are you able to easily answer the questions that are on here? And what I'm going to do again, because I want this to be practical for you today, is I'm just going to be quiet for a couple of minutes for you to look at these questions, think about them, and write down your answers. And I'd love to encourage you to set a SMART goal for yourself. And beyond setting a SMART goal, right? Specific, measurable, achievable, realistic with a time frame. I'm going to meet with Jackie in the next 2 weeks. I'll know I did it because we'll have had the meeting. I've prepared my questions ahead of time, and the time frame is in the next 2 weeks. That's a SMART goal, right? That's an action. Then what I want you to do is make a plan and actually schedule it in, because just thinking about it doesn't do anything, right? We need to take action and take a step forward. So I'm actually just going to be quiet, and I'm going to give you a few minutes just landing on this slide to think about this, to answer the questions. And then when I come back, I'm going to answer whatever questions you have about this. So is everyone clear on the exercise? Pen and paper, self-reflection, over to you. Okay, so I know part of today's I want to give you time and space to think about these things because I know in the busyness of our days, right, we don't really give ourselves the opportunity or the time. So, what questions do you have for me about this slide? Is there anyone here who is not clear where they want to be in a year, 2 years, 5 years? Is there anyone here who's not sure? Okay, so that's really good. The rest of you have clarity. And I'm just going to say, because I know that this recording is available, that if there are folks who are not sure or not clear, the simplest strategy that I suggest for people is to actually just go on places like Indeed or go on LinkedIn and type in the job that you do now and look at the career path or advancement path that by seeing other job descriptions and ads that are out there. And what that does is help you start to get clarity. Back in the old days, and you're going to laugh, but when we used to have newspapers, I would say to people, go and look at the job ads and cut out the things that are of interest to you, right? Not where you are now, but where you want to be. And just start making piles. And then what happens is you really start to see the similarities. And from there, I think job ads are great because they clearly outline things like skills, knowledge, and experience. Right? So if you don't know someone in your network, that's another really good strategy to help you get some clarity. Okay, so if there are no questions, I don't see anything in the chat. Oh, yeah. Okay, now I see a question. Great. Thank you. Please unmute yourself.
Hey, how do I define, or do you have any suggestions on how to define realistic SMART goals? Because, for example, I could say one of my SMART goals is to obtain a leadership position in the next 2 years with my current company. But if there's no opportunity for that to happen, then that SMART goal isn't necessarily achievable or realistic.
Yeah. Okay, so here's what I'm going to say. I think when it comes to your career, the sky's the limit. And so what I'm going to encourage you to do is if that's a goal of yours, the first step, the action, would be to have that conversation with your immediate manager or supervisor and articulate that and ask them for input and feedback. And if they are honest and clear with you and they say, you know what, there really isn't going to be an opportunity for you here, at least then you know that. So now the next move is up to you. It's kind of like a chess game, isn't it? Okay, what are you going to do with that information? Are you going to stay and be happy and satisfied, or might be time for you to start looking elsewhere? But at least you now have that information. And trust me when I say, when I do performance management training with managers, I really encourage managers to be honest with employees. Like, let's not string people along. This is their livelihood that we're talking about here. These are people's careers. So if there is literally no opportunity for someone for advancement, let's be honest with them and tell them why. It is a hard question, though, to answer honestly, isn't it? Because as we've learned in the world we live in right now, change is fast and furious. And it's hard to be super clear a year out, 2 years out. Like none of us really know. There is a ton of uncertainty, isn't there? So I also think sometimes we have to live with that uncertainty and that ambiguity. I would also encourage you if you're thinking, but I love this place and I love these people and I love my manager. The thought of leaving really is not something I want to do. There's options. I would then say to my supervisor or manager, like, if anything new comes up, can you give me that opportunity? Or if there's any challenges that come up, right? Like, ask for opportunities to express some leadership, even if you're not actually getting the physical promotion. Does that make sense? So it's, I want some leadership experience. And I've seen a lot of employees successfully manage this way for years, right? They don't move on because even though they might not advance to get the title or the amount of money, they're still learning and growing and developing through training, right? Through challenging work, through new opportunities that come up. So I think there's a number of ways that you could address that, but it's a great question. Did that give you some ideas?
Yeah, thanks. That was great.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions on this? Okay, so now we're going to move on, and this is, just a really important topic for us to discuss when it comes to your own career success. So I've been teaching leadership development, and truthfully, for some of the top companies in the world, and so I'm sharing with you some of the stuff that we teach people in leadership so that you have that awareness. And what I'm going to say is your emotional intelligence has an 85% impact on your career success. So that is not a Debbie Permain theory. It is well researched, well documented by lots of leading leadership organizations. One organization called DDI that I do some leadership training for has done decades of research on these topics. And they literally looked at all the different leadership skills. And they found in their decades of research that emotional intelligence had the largest impact on a leader's success. So, number one, not sure if that's something that you are all aware of. And number two, have you had training on this topic? So I'm just curious, and you could put a yes in the chat or a no in the chat, but how many of you have actually had training on the topic of emotional intelligence? Okay, so yay, I'm seeing a lot of you saying yes, which is really good news, okay? Because there's lots of companies and organizations that are not giving this training. And so for those of you who haven't had it, then I'm really going to encourage you, right? Watch some YouTube videos, get a book on it. Like, again, you're in the driver's seat of your career. So if your company hasn't given training on emotional intelligence, that doesn't mean you can't learn this skill, right? So for those of you who are saying, no, I'm getting a few little private no's, what I want to say to you is go on YouTube, watch a TED Talk, right? These things take 15 minutes, get a book. I'm certified to do emotional intelligence assessments on people and also provide training and coaching on emotional intelligence. And really the kind of nuts and bolts of emotional intelligence, there's three key things, okay? So I'm going to do a quick summary for all of you here who have had the training. Number one is self-awareness, right? So this is a lot of what we're talking about here today. And self-awareness has three parts to it. So the first part is, what are my strengths? I need to know what I'm good at so I can put myself in situations that use my strengths. That's what successful people do. And if I'm not sure of my strengths, what could I do? So I'm asking all of you who have had training on this, if I'm not sure of my strengths, what could I do? Give me an idea. If you've had the training, you know the answer. How can you become aware of your strengths? Remember, feel free to unmute yourself. It might be faster. Okay, I'm going to help you out. Ask for feedback, right? This is where we're wanting to be coachable. Feedback is your friend. The ego is not your amigo, and it needs to be in the back seat, right? So this is where I'm going to say, hey, Allie, I really would love you to let me know what my strengths are. And part of your manager's job is to get to know your strengths so they can put you in positions to use your strength. But part of your job is to know your strengths so you can put yourself in positions or advocate for yourself, right, Allie? Like, people aren't mind readers. Another thing you could do is do some free assessments. So there's a ton of skill assessments online that you can do for free to help you get to know what your strengths are. Asking for feedback, doing assessments. And then I'd also say, just to go back in time and look at some of your past performance reviews. The other piece of emotional intelligence is, what are your weaknesses? And we don't call them weaknesses anymore. We call them opportunities for growth or areas of development. But the bottom line about emotional intelligence is we all have them, right? None of us are perfect. So are you aware of your weaknesses or the things you don't do well when it comes to your career? And again, if the answer is I'm not sure, right? So it starts with self-reflection. Then the next step would be to go and ask someone you trust for feedback. Please tell me what I could improve on. I want to be successful. So there's a huge piece of emotional intelligence that involves humility, right? We need to be willing, and I always say to folks, to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? We need to hear it all so that we can make decisions of how we want to manage that. Do we want more training? Do we need more coaching? Sometimes literally I coach people and say, you might need to consider a different position because the position you're doing is really bringing out your weaknesses. That's not going to help you thrive and be successful. So people who are emotionally intelligent know their strengths, know their weaknesses, and Brian, they know their blind spots because they're humble. They ask people for feedback and they're open and they're willing to hear it. Does that make sense? So that's really the nuts and bolts of emotional intelligence. And then people use that information to help them manage relationships successfully. So another thing that I really encourage people to do when it comes to managing their career is to think about the relationships that they need in order for them to be successful, right? So who are the people in your organization that you need to be in favor with in order for you to succeed? And that's a part of building your network, right? And that's a part of you seeking out to develop relationships with those people. So that's the part of emotional intelligence that we call organizational awareness. So if I was working in a company and I had career goals, right? Brian, if I was emotionally intelligent, and I'm only saying Brian because you haven't had this training and other folks have, right? But Brian, if I was in your seat, I would say, who do I need to have favor with in order for me to be successful? Who can help me get there? And then I would want to create relationships with those people, right? I would reach out to them. I would ask for advice. I would ask to take them for a coffee. I would ask to take them for lunch. I would ask to meet with them for 15 minutes. I would let them know my strengths and what I'm doing well. I would let them know my interests. And I would also ask them for advice and feedback, right? What do you think, Brian? What do I need to improve on in order to get there? I'm asking you for your advice. I'm asking you for your mentoring. So I do want to pause because I know a number of you have had training on emotional intelligence. And here's the thing. This is an entirely different training course, right? We could do 2 hours easy just on the topic of emotional intelligence. But the reason I'm highlighting this today in this workshop on career success is, do you know your current EQ score? Just because you've had the training doesn't mean you know where you are on the EQ journey, right? Have you had an assessment? And then do you know your strengths and your weaknesses? And what are you doing to help strengthen and build on those weaknesses? So what questions do you have for me? If anyone is interested in doing an EQ assessment, I'm happy. You can reach out to me and I can give you information on that. There are a ton of free assessments online, right? Again, you can just go on Google, free EQ assessments. But you need to know where you are today, and you need to know your strengths, your weaknesses, and then you need to create a bit of a development plan for yourself. Does anyone have any questions on the importance of emotional intelligence in their career success? A lot of people have had the training, they have the head knowledge, but they're not actually doing anything with that knowledge, right? It's do an assessment, make a development plan. When I interview people for senior leader positions, I'm going to tell you this is absolutely factual. When I have two individuals, so say I had Cyrus and I had Cameron, and they have the exact same schooling and they have the exact same years of experience doing the exact same jobs. And I'm like, who's going to make the better supervisor? Guess what? I start asking questions in the interview around emotional intelligence. I even get both of you to do an assessment on emotional intelligence because that is what's going to help me determine who will make the better leader. That's how important this is. So what questions do you have?
I have a question actually.
Great.
So my question about emotional intelligence is there something that can limit you from being emotionally intelligent, like having like an intrinsic personality trait uh, that cannot let you reach like high emotional intelligence?
I mean, it's a great question. Here's what I'm going to say. I've been working in this area for over 20 years. I think everyone's coachable. Emotional intelligence, a lot of it are soft skills, and soft skills can be learned. I don't think it's like a personality trait thing, right? So I think soft skills can be learned. And I think depending on your initial assessment and your scores, like I'll be honest, I've worked with leaders who score really low in certain components. But then we go on a bit of a coaching journey together, right? Where I do some teaching, I do some coaching, and it's kind of like going to the gym, right? I don't know if anyone here has ever seen a personal trainer, but on day one, usually the first step is just to kind of assess where you're at, right? With your strength and your muscles. And I'm sure some of you have some muscles that aren't very strong. And then the trainer develops a program, don't they, to help you strengthen those muscles. But let's be real, those muscles don't strengthen from you just going home and thinking about it. Like you need to show up at the gym and do the work, right? So with emotional intelligence, getting a baseline assessment is really important if you want to become a leader. And then putting some kind of training and development plan in place to help you strengthen those areas that you might score low is really critical to your success. So I hope that answered your question.
Thank you.
Yeah. It does take time, right? And it takes effort and it takes energy. And for some people, they'll get it just from the training, but other people might need some more ongoing coaching support to be able to strengthen those skills. It takes time too, right? It takes time. You don't become a bodybuilder in 2 weeks. Like it takes years, right, of effort and sweat and hard work. Okay, so we will move on from the emotional intelligence conversation, but it does actually pivot nicely into this next topic, which is in order for you to be successful in your career, you need to be coachable. And I mean, there's even books about it. I pulled out this one. I don't know if you can see it. It's called Coachability, the Leadership Superpower This is one of my favorite books right now. And so I do teaching in companies to help employees learn to become more coachable. There's a whole bunch of skills that are part of being coachable, but I just want to ask all of you to tell me, what does it even mean to be coachable? So can you all think of one characteristic of someone who is coachable? Like, how would I know? I literally have had people's careers get derailed because their manager comes to me and says, so-and-so is not coachable. It's like, who wants to work with someone like that? It's really difficult, right? And you're not going to be successful if you aren't coachable. So yes, number one is you have to have enough confidence in yourself that you're okay to receive constructive feedback without getting angry or getting defensive, right? You have to be able to receive the feedback and kind of just sit with it. So being okay to receive feedback. Yes, being humble. Brian, I love it. Being approachable, like people aren't scared to give you feedback. They're like, I can go talk to you. You'll be open-minded. Thank you. Open-minded and willing to hear my perspective. I also think being coachable involves some curiosity. Like, I don't know everything, so I want to hear what Sahab has to say. Thank you. A huge part of being coachable, absolutely, Francisco, is to implement the advice that you're given. So it's not just like, oh, I took the advice, but I actually did something with the advice because I recognize that if someone is taking the time to give me any feedback or coaching, it's because they care and they want me to be successful. Like, I don't know about you, but we are all so busy every day. So if someone actually didn't care about your success, like they'd probably just move on with their day and not take the time to give you the feedback, right? So if someone's taking the time to give you coaching or feedback, then be thankful. Like, actually listen. Consider the feedback. Don't just throw it away. Like, actually consider the feedback. That takes confidence and it takes maturity. If you're not sure on the feedback, because I will be honest, not every supervisor or manager knows how to give feedback, knows how to give feedback well, knows how to give feedback constructively, knows how to give feedback in ways that help learn, right? Then ask for examples. Sometimes you get feedback, it's too vague or it's too general. And if that's the case, ask for specific examples. Like, Ivy, I'm really wanting to understand what you're saying. Can you actually give me some examples so that I better understand what you're saying? Right? There's nothing wrong with you asking for examples. I also think if you receive feedback, it's important that you're then clear on what they expect moving forward. Right? So it's not enough to just get the feedback and then you're left sitting with this feedback sandwich. Like, what do I do with this? So it's okay for you to say, so just so I'm clear, your expectation moving forward is that I do X, Y, and Z. Like, get clarity on that, right? So are there any questions that you have around being coachable? So that's kind of your 50%, right? And what I then want us to talk about is another piece of your responsibilities in managing your career success is learning how to kind of manage your manager. So I'm sure many of you have heard that before. It's called managing upwards. That's an important skill to have. And so now we're going to do our second breakout session. And again, I'm going to give you about 7 minutes and I will recreate the breakout rooms just so you have a chance to connect and meet different people. And what I'd love for you to do in this conversation is just talk about the strategies that you've learned in your career? So I see lots of you here with great work experience. What have you learned over the years that works well when it comes to kind of managing upwards? And how about you again do a line down the middle of the page? What works well? And then the other column is what doesn't work. So what works well, what doesn't work? Okay, those are the two things you're going to discuss. And I'll give you 7 minutes. And then when you come back, we'll do a quick debrief. Does anyone have questions on the activity? Okay, so rooms are open and I'll see you back here shortly. Okay, looks like everybody's back, which is great. So I want to hear some of your great experience, and we'll start first. This time we'll go from the bottom up. So Amy, Francisco, Sahab, what are some of your strategies? Maybe just give us 2 and then we can move along.
Sure. For things that worked well, we found that being curious, asking a lot of questions is a really good strategy. And in terms of things that don't usually work well, kind of trying to micromanage, trying to control every aspect of the managing relationship tends to not work too well.
Okay, awesome. Really good points. Thank you. And I hope people are jotting down some things that they're hearing. Let's go to the next group. Allie, Brian, Mancy, Robin. Any one of you jump in?
I can
Thank
jump in. So for strategies that helped us, basically asking for training, showing that you're independent, to not let your manager like promote micromanagement, and possibly giving feedback to your manager if you think things are not going well between your relationship. Things that haven't worked, Brian mentioned waiting for when you're in a review session to say that things are going bad. And also he mentioned encouraging micromanagement too. So as
Okay.
Francisco mentioned.
Yeah, great. Good. Lots of good ideas. And we'll keep going on. The group that had Cameron, Carly, Cyrus, and Suk.
Yeah, I can go for them. I think the main one we talked was relationship building, being transparent and giving feedback. The one thing was that be adaptable, like learn what's the management style that your manager has and adapt to it. And the things that doesn't work well is like maybe skipping the line of command, like maybe like going to directly to their superior and like having that relationship, breaking that trust. I think that would also doesn't work.
Yeah, so good. Okay, really important tips here. And what about for the group? The other Brian, Everts, Jackie, Karen Preet, Kamal.
Sorry.
Any-
What works well is just open to feedback, taking actions on constructive feedback from your like manager, and just writing down key moments, key expectations while you're doing your tasks and doing your job as you're supposed to. It's in the past, in my experience, is that if we do just keep a verbal recognition of what's happening, it may not fully be like not everyone has a perfect memory of what is actually happening or what you have done. Like not everyone's around you or micromanaging you all the time to know what you're actually doing in a role and what impact you're playing. So that could be and I believe the last thing is manager's management style is dependent on if like you're trying to provide feedback to your manager that I've been doing this. They could either you need to know how they are or how they respond to the feedback that you're giving. Either they could be data oriented or they could just be around like a bigger picture on like what you bring to your role and what are your assets you bring to this company.
Yeah, so good. Okay, I love it. It's like get to know your manager, get to know their style, get to know how they prefer to be communicated with. Anything to add? The last group is Yutong, Paul, Maya, and is it Kruskaya? I apologize. But who would like to share anything from that group?
Looking over the list, almost everything's been covered. Two things that we came up with in our group that are a little bit different. One would be advocating for self-advocation. So when you've had success, let others know that you've had that success, but also commend any other people who have helped you have that success. Be transparent in your successes with your manager or activities where you need help. And then another big one is, it's been sort of said, but understand the priorities that are being asked when you have tasks being asked. So your boss is obviously going to have different priorities. Understand which ones are the important ones and handle those sort of first.
I love that. So again, don't make assumptions about priorities. And if you've got way too much on your plate and you're really not sure, that is stop what you're doing. Ask for a quick check-in. I'm throwing these things out to you. Can you let me know what you want me to prioritize on? That is a great suggestion. I also really want to encourage you, beyond the asking for feedback, giving feedback, right? It's like keeping them informed, not just of what's not going well, but of what is going well, right? It can get so overwhelming as a manager. Imagine you had 10 people reporting to you and all you're ever hearing is all the problems. Like, keep them informed of the good things that you're doing. And can I also encourage all of you, this is something I did early on in my career and it was really helpful, is I had a little file folder back in the day, paper. You could do this on your phone somewhere. And when I did something well, or something went well, or I achieved a goal, I just made a note of it for myself. So that when I was doing a check-in or a one-on-one with my manager, it just helped remind me. And I also did that throughout the year, because at the end of the year, if you do a performance review, and a best practice should be you fill out yours, they fill out one, the two of you come and have a meeting of the minds, right? Well, it's going to be a lot easier for you to do your own performance review if you are somewhere keeping track of your successes during the year. You want that conversation to be reflective of the entire year, right? Not just the last 3 months of work, because that's all you remember. So I really encourage you to start documenting and keeping track for yourself, all right? So again, just an opportunity for you to ask me anything. What questions do you have about managing upwards?
I was wondering, what's the goal of managing upwards? Is it to influence your manager, or to what purpose?
Okay, that's a really, really good question. So here's the thing. You need to put yourself in the shoes of your manager. So can everyone put themselves in the shoes of their manager, or put the manager hat on for a minute? Now, some of you might be supervisors already or managers, and you've got someone above you. So just put your mindset into their position. They've got a whole bunch of responsibilities that they are responsible for, right? So like you, they have a job description, they have goals, they have expectations on them. And then they have the additional responsibility of managing and supervising a whole bunch of people. Doesn't that sound a bit challenging? So managing your manager is about you helping yourself, and you're helping them manage you. It's kind of like your 50%, right? So they're doing their best to manage you, but they also don't know everything. So by you asking, can we have these check-ins? I'm communicating, I'm self-advocating, I'm giving you feedback about what's going well, I'm letting you know what's not going well. You're helping facilitate your career success. Does that make sense? And you're also helping them not feel so stressed out about all the responsibilities that they have. So there's kind of a two-way benefit to it. Did that answer your question?
Yep, thank you.
Okay, great. It was a great question. Any other questions on managing up?
Yeah, I have one.
Okay.
I worked with different managers in the past, different personalities and all that. What kind of advice do you have for managing difficult managers? The know everything type of personalities. How would you go around that?
Yeah, okay, that's a great question. And so going around it, probably not gonna work for you, right? So I think the idea is you recognize, okay, this person's personality might be to be an expert. So they may not necessarily want to know, right? Any constructive feedback. But are there things that you can do still to help yourself be successful? Like asking for meetings, asking for feedback, keeping them informed, asking for help, asking for training, right? Asking for clear expectations. So still do the things that you're able to do. You can't always influence with all of this, right? So I'd look at this list and ask yourself, what can I still do? Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Now, here's the thing. What if you're asking for what you want and need to help you be successful and you're not getting it? Then what? I mean, I'm asking all of you. Then what? Yeah, thank you. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Cameron.
Sorry, actually, that was just another question that I had. I don't actually have a
Oh,
direct answer to
okay.
this.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so pause on your question.
sure.
Yeah, if you're not getting what you need, so you're asking for coaching, you're asking for training, you're asking for feedback. I mean, there is the risk, I think, of going up the chain, because one of the things we said earlier was that doesn't tend to go well, right? But what about if you have a person in HR? Could you speak to them, and could you speak to them in confidence? Right? One of the things about HR is there is a need to keep confidences if employees come to them. So a lot of what HR folks do is help with what we call employee relations. And I would encourage to seek some kind of outside help or input in trying to manage or handle that situation for yourself. I see two other questions. So Cameron, we'll come to you first, and then we'll go to Allie.
Sure, thanks. So my question is basically, it's related to how companies really sort of keep their budgets tight and try to, maximize their productivity and output. And sometimes your manager is overburdened.
Yeah.
And I find this to be like very common. Seems to be quite common. I mean, I don't have that much experience, but so I'm finding it difficult to like strike a balance between managing up and also like being coachable. Like those two things, like actually forget the being coachable, but like managing up when you know for sure that your manager is overburdened, right? So like you want to be building a relationship with your manager, but at the same time, you don't want to be too demanding because you know that they can only do what they can do. So like, how do you strike a balance between developing a relationship with your manager and still managing up?
Yeah. Okay, that's a really good question. And so again, I think the advice I'm going to give you is to look at the things on this list. What is within your control that you can do? And then the question becomes, what cadence is realistic, right? So remember earlier we talked about check-ins. So maybe in that case, like a weekly check-in is just too much. It's too much need. It's too much demand on that person. But maybe every 2 weeks or 3 weeks is more reasonable. And Cameron, I would again say, let's take the guesswork out of it. Let's not make assumptions. Let's just ask them. right? So I recognize that you have a lot of responsibility on your plate, right? But as someone who reports to you, I also have this need for us to kind of check in, get feedback, keep each other informed, and list the things. So what would feel reasonable or realistic to you? And put that question back to your manager. That would be my advice to you.
Okay.
That's a really good question, right? And I mean, if they come back and they're like, nothing, well, that's not a good answer, Cameron. But
Yeah.
if it said, you know, let's set a meeting every 3 weeks, and then if I really can't, I'll have to cancel it. And you're just like, okay, you know, every 3 weeks is better than nothing.
Right.
So asking them for what is reasonable. But remember what you're hearing me say today, Cameron, is the needs that you have are also important and reasonable. So it's literally just having a collaborative conversation to come up with some kind of system to do the things we've talked about today with a time frame that makes sense to both of you.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not all or nothing. It's not all them and not you. That's now you're not helping yourself, right?
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah,
Or
so it's a great question. So who else has
Thanks.
a question though? Did Ali have a question?
Yes, I have a quick. I just wanted to expand on the thought of what if you ask for training and you're not being provided that from your manager?
Yeah.
So are we considering that we've transparently and explicitly told our managers that our expectations are not being met before going to a third party to basically help?
Okay, so back to the question is before, say, you go to like talk to someone in HR.
Yes.
I mean, I am going to say again, I think the rules of feedback apply. So let's flip the script, Ali, and pretend it's you as the manager. If I was your manager, Ali, and you and I had had numerous conversations that landed nowhere, at some point I would go speak to HR.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you're in trouble. It just means I'm going to HR to ask for advice on how to handle this. So let's flip it around. Now it's you, and you've had numerous conversations with your manager. Don't look at the going to HR for advice as you're telling on them and they're going to get in trouble. Like that's
That makes
not
sense.
the point of it, right? The point of it is HR is there to help you manage the relationship. So there's a part of HR that's employee relations. And now the question might be, what happens if you don't have HR? Then I'm going to encourage you to think of who could you talk to confidentially to get some advice? Is there a mentor you have in the company? Is there another manager that you know will keep your confidence? Right? I mean, I even say to people sometimes it's like, could you call the EAP program? They actually give you career management advice for free and it's totally confidential outside of the organization, right? So there are different avenues for you to get advice and support.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so thank you. And then I did hear there was one other question. And so let's take the question, but then we do need to move on in the interest of time. So was there another question?
it wasn't so much a question, it was more of a comment.
Okay.
Actually, specifically a response to Cameron's comment. He has a
Okay.
manager that's overwhelmed and he can see it. So you're recognizing that the manager is overwhelmed. If you've got the confidence, is there anything you can do to help that manager be less overwhelmed, take on some additional tasks? It sort of does two things because it identifies you as someone who's trying to take on new challenges. You're building rapport with the manager, i.e. managing up, but as a trade-off, it would give you the ability to interact with that manager more and then perhaps get the interactions that you're trying to have with that manager that he can't give to you or she can't give to you.
Yeah,
That's a good
great.
idea.
Yeah, great input. I love it. And, you know, again, if you have capacity and if you don't, what's another strategy, right? So we need a whole bunch of different ideas. So thank you so much for sharing that. I do, just in the interest of our time, want to just go through the next couple of slides so we can wrap things up. what we have been talking about today is this idea of if you're managing up, then you are giving feedback. And so this is a skill. And unfairly, we don't teach employees how to do this well. And so that's why sometimes it doesn't go well, right? So similar to the way we teach managers and supervisors how to give you feedback, I thought I would just take a moment to talk about that here. So a really simple method, right? There's 4 steps that I love to use when giving people feedback about anything. It could be positive, it could be constructive, is to simply follow these 4 steps. So when this happened, and then be specific with the example, right? So Francisco, when you called me out in the team meeting in front of everybody, the next step is, what impact did that have on you? You know, this really made me feel embarrassed in front of my peers. And so then what's your request? So I would just like to ask that if you have constructive feedback for me, that you do that like privately or like in our one-on-ones. And is that something we can agree to moving forward? So that was me walking you through an example of just the 4 steps and how to perhaps deliver constructive feedback, right, to your manager or supervisor in a way that's simple, direct, easy to articulate and understand. And then the opposite is also true, right? You can use the 4 steps, and in fact, it's 3 steps when you're giving positive feedback. So it's just, when this happened, it made me feel really good or empowered or confident. And I would love for you to just give me more feedback on that if you see that happening again, right? So using these steps just gives you a little bit of a roadmap on how I would plan out that conversation with my manager. And then there is a list on the next slide of some do's and don'ts. So just to remember best practices. When you're giving someone feedback, right, be specific, give examples, use respectful language, follow that process. Maybe you ask questions to understand, and make sure it's timely. And then, of course, the don'ts, right? Don't give feedback when you're upset, you're angry, you're frustrated. Don't make it personal, and don't be vague. Don't just wing it. Like, take time to think it through and write out and plan those steps and what you'll say. Don't just make it a one-way download, because then they're going to feel bombarded. And don't sit on it and stew over it. So these are just some simple kind of do's and don'ts for you to remember if you are going to be giving feedback to your manager. Does anyone have any questions on giving feedback? And because I don't see any feedback, I'll just say our last topic here before we wrap up our time together is on building your network. And this is really, you know, the value also of mentors. So I really encourage you to think about people in your industry that you could build relationships with, whether that's through professional associations or even on LinkedIn. Maybe it's through the school that you graduated from. I think another great way to help you build your network is just to be visible. So if there are things that happen, you might volunteer. So if there's committees or if there's events that your company does, if you can get involved in those things, that helps you to meet different people than your manager and the people on your team, right? That helps you to expand your network. I want to remind you of the importance of maintaining your network. So it's not just like, oh, I went to school with these people 20 years ago. It's, what do you do to try somehow to keep in touch? And this doesn't need to be anything that's exhaustive, but do you post updates? Do you reach out every once in a while? Are you having any kind of touch points throughout the year with the people who could help you, right, to manage your career and your success? And we've already talked about the importance of just even sharing with those people some of the updates of your success and the things that you're doing. We, I think, don't have the time to do a breakout, but I do just want to ask all of you, are there any other ideas or suggestions you have for building your network? This is a really important piece, especially now when it comes to recruitment and selection. I was actually speaking to someone the other day about this. They're like, it's all about who you know now. Because what's happening is so many people have moved to these online platforms, right? That literally you have no option anymore of personally sending emails and attachments. It's just you're one of hundreds of people in a database. So the more you can connect with people in your industry, get to know people and have a network, that can really help you in your next move or in your career advancement, because you are able to then reach out to those people. And I have that happen to me all the time. Now, I know I'm in HR, but I get so many different messages on LinkedIn like, hey, I'm applying for this job and I saw you're connected. Is there anything you could do to help me? Or can I forward you my resume and you forward it to this person for me? So I just want to reinforce to you the importance of thinking about who's in your network. And if you don't have a network, thinking about ways that you can start to grow and increase your network. And there's all kinds of ideas on the slide up here. Does anyone else have anything to add to this conversation on building your network?
I have one small thing to add about building industry relationships. I just feel that you need to be prepared to introduce yourself effectively and
Yes.
be strategic with how you're reaching out.
Yes.
So you can maintain those relationships and people can see value of maintaining that relationship, basically.
I love that. So I always talk about the value of first impressions, and I say to people I coach, like, prepare your elevator pitch. And I know this sounds so awkward for some of you and uncomfortable, but if you were to meet me in the elevator and I was to say, so Sahab, like, tell me what you do. I want you to prepare a really good kind of 1 or 2 minute introduction about you. Because first impressions really make a difference, right? Or if you go to a professional association event, or if you go to some kind of grad event from wherever you graded from school, or if you're in some kind of networking situation, like, I'm going to walk away with an impression of you and what you do. So can you prepare that kind of 2-minute, what I call elevator pitch? And I do encourage you to think of yourself a bit like a brand. So that's one of the things I also see when people are applying for jobs. They don't do a good job selling themselves and marketing themselves. Like, why do I want to interview you? I've got 500 resumes that all look the same as yours. How are you making yourself stand out? Like, I mean, you might laugh at this, but one of the jobs I applied for 20 years ago, back in the day, we had fax machines. I literally sent a page and it said top 10 reasons to hire me. And I listed 10 things. I sent that like a week after I'd sent my resume and cover letter and heard nothing back. And then they actually phoned me for an interview. So you got to get creative. You're a brand. You've got skills. You've got strengths. Do people know that about you? How are you selling yourself? How are you marketing yourself? And this is why mentors, right, are so important. So again, this is who's in your network. Who do you know? Who knows people if you don't know people? Ask. Don't be afraid. Email a bunch of people that are in your job that you know that are peers and say, hey, I'm interested in this. Do any of you know anyone? Like, see if they can connect you.
Dave, I'm just curious how that interview went after that.
I did get the job, so that was great. And they even said in the interview that that's why they interviewed me, was because of that thing that I sent them.
Nice.
So I know it feels uncomfortable, right? But I think a huge part of what you're hearing today, again, you're in the driver's seat of your success. You need to take ownership over your 50%. What could you be doing more of to help you succeed? And a lot of this comes down to self-management, self-advocacy. Focus on your 50%. So as we wrap up our time together, because I know there's a few announcements that Ivy has for you, can you take a moment and remember at the beginning today, I did say, I don't want this just to be a lot of me just giving you knowledge, right? This is why we've allowed time today for discussion, for self-reflection. So can we just be quiet for a minute or two and you reflect on everything you've heard today? Are there a couple of actions that you can commit to after today that are going to help you move forward in your career success? Okay. Final moment to ask any questions that you have. I hope you're all leaving here today with some good action steps. So are there any last minute questions before Ivy takes over? I do want to just say thank you so much. You were so great today with your questions and your involvement and your participation. So thank you for that. I'll do a little quick plug and just say on September 19th, I'm doing another webinar on leading change. If this is something you'd like to learn about, we'd love to have you. Spread the word, right, Ivy? And also you see on November 14th, Resilient Leadership. I'll be teaching that. And again, if this is something you'd like to learn, we'd love to see you and feel free to spread the word on that as well. And thank you for having me today.